Jessica, thank you so much for coming on the Easy Pray podcast today.
It's my pleasure. Thanks, Chris.
Can you give myself and the audience a little bit of background about who you are and what you do?
Sure. So, I work on the human side of cybersecurity. For the last 12 years, I've really made it my mission to shine a light on cybersecurity awareness, behavior, and culture. So, I'm interested in understanding what makes people tick when it comes to cybersecurity, what we can do to better engage people, how we can empower people and move them towards practicing more secure behaviors.
Awesome. And what got you into the field?
Luck, essentially. I was finishing my PhD, which was about the internet, but not about security. So I came to my PhD from a background in sociology and politics and working in urban regeneration. Then for my PhD, I was looking at the growth of the internet economy and really what the internet had meant and means to society, to culture, to communities. And I didn't know what I wanted to do next, but I knew I didn't want to keep doing what I was doing at the time. And I essentially was headhunted for a small cybersecurity firm specializing in defense who felt they had all of the technical capability that they wanted. And they really were looking for someone who could speak to people, who could interview people, who understood qualitative data, and who could really make inroads on the human side. And lucky for me, after Googling what is cybersecurity when I first got approached, it ended up being me. And I really haven't looked back.
That's awesome. And one of the things that I ask, particularly my cybersecurity guests, are have you been a victim of a cybersecurity incident or almost been a victim of a scam?
I think probably all of us have at least almost been a victim. I have I actually been a victim? Not that I know of, and I think it's important to add that caveat because sometimes you don't know for a while. As far as I'm aware, I have never been a victim. There's certainly been times where I have received an email, a message, or where someone's, approached me in person and I've been flustered, I've been busy, and I've come close. Um, then there's also been times where I've received an email or a message and I've thought this looks a bit fishy. And then when I've checked it out, it's turned out to be legitimate, which is always an interesting feeling. I was recently invited to the Royal Garden Party at Buckingham Palace, celebrating King Charles's coronation. And that was one of those times I received the email and I was like, yeah, right, this is a
Yeah.
fish. And it wasn't. So being vigilant is helpful, but I always say the right fish at the wrong time can catch any of us. And I very much include myself in that.
Yeah, that's interesting because an invitation such as that is the sort of thing that is very flattering and is like, oh, that's something I would want to do.
Yeah,
But I think I would have the same reaction of like, nah, this sounds too good to be true. This
exactly.
must be fake. How
Yeah.
long did it take you to figure out that it was actually a real invite and not a phishing attempt?
Well, I sent it on to my husband, who is an ethical hacker. He runs Sygenta with me. And so he checked it out and he came back. It's very handy having him as tech support. He came back, he was like, no, this is real. We're going to Buckingham Palace.
But I think that's actually to me, always one of the key things is you actually farmed it off to someone else. As
Yes.
opposed to like, I'm taking myself out of the equation.
Yeah.
And that always seems to be almost a really good stopping point for scams.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I'm lucky, that obviously he's been ethical hacking for like nearly 3 decades. So it's great having that at home. But at the same time, and all the research supports this as well, if you receive something that looks a bit fishy, then even just reading it aloud to someone else, A, you get their opinion, but B, I think even more importantly, it allows you that chance to take stock, take a step back, slow down the way you're processing that information, and so you are more likely to identify it's a scam.
So I know with like reading stuff, I will if I read it out, if I read it, I kind of
Mm.
listen. I interpret it one way. If I read it out loud, it can come across as different.
Yes,
And
so
sometimes I
true.
catch things. I think I always tell people that are writing for me, read it out loud and see
Yes.
if this makes sense. Like you're reading, something about the process of reading it out loud changes the way that you interact with that. Is that kind of one of the techniques of dealing
I
with
I think it
cybersecurity?
is. Yeah, I think it is because you're right. You process that information differently. You're able to spot something that, for some reason, if you're just, looking at it internally, you're less likely to identify. I think also coming back to something later, maybe looking at it the next day. These are all techniques we can use to really just slow down how we're interacting with that information. And if it's got that time pressure in, that's kind of, you've got to deal with it right away, well, that in itself is a red flag. I always say my recipe for spotting a scam is if it's unexpected, if it makes you feel something, and if it asks you to do something, that's a very toxic combination.
Isn't that also marketing in general?
It's certainly, there's a fine line, I think, isn't there, between persuasion and manipulation. I know they are very
Yeah,
different, but at the same time, it can seem like the same techniques being used, particularly when we get into more aggressive sales.
yeah.
And I had that experience actually in Las Vegas on my first visit. I live here now, but when I first visited, walking through one of the hotels, and somebody there starts chatting to me. They're very complimentary about my accent. They're very friendly. And then before I know it, they have seamlessly moved into trying to sell me a timeshare. And it was I walked away like, wow, I didn't sign up. It took a lot though to get out of that conversation. And I walked away thinking, wow, I've just had a masterclass in social engineering.
Well, I think most of Vegas is in itself a class in social engineering.
That's absolutely true. Yeah, we're taking notes.
We're all very excited to go there and give people our money.
Yes, exactly.
So the human side of cybersecurity, how do you define that? I think we all kind of think of we understand well, maybe we don't understand, but we all kind of get the grasp of the technical aspects of cybersecurity, having data segregated, limiting access, two-factor authentication. How does the human side come into play?
The way I think about it, if we look at the life cycle of information or technology, people are involved at every stage. So whether this is the, initial concept of a new piece of technology, whether this is it being designed, developed, used, abused, the impact of technology, people are absolutely vital at every stage. We are not securing information for the sake of that information or the sake of the technology itself. And there is no such thing as malicious machines, despite what we may be seeing in the media about AI. It's still people at the end of the day. So we can think of the human side in terms of the work I do day to day, which is awareness raising, helping organizations understand the behaviors of people that work for them, helping them understand their cybersecurity culture and develop it in that way. But there are lots of other human elements in terms of attacker motivation and methods, in terms of accidental issues, the
Yeah.
psychology there, in terms of malicious insiders and what motivates a malicious insider. And then, of course, in terms of the impact. So there's lots of elements where psychology, sociology, behavioral economics, marketing, neuroscience, all of these amazing disciplines with so much that they can teach us about people and that we can take and draw on in cybersecurity.
So is there, if we're talking like generational or the neuroscience, you and I grew up in an age where we were not as connected to our devices
Sure.
as people are now. Are there generations or age groups that tend to do better on the cybersecurity side of things, that somehow their thought process is different about cybersecurity?
Yeah, it's a good question. And obviously, there's lots of factors that come into play. But if we're speaking generally, a lot of research shows there are different approaches between different generations. And what you will often hear people say is an assumption that the younger generation, 18 to 24-year-olds, maybe even younger than that, there's this assumption that, oh, they don't have any respect for cybersecurity or privacy. They're very open, they don't practice secure behaviors. And actually, all the research shows that's not generally true. Actually, younger generations usually have more of an understanding and engagement with cybersecurity. They're more inclined to practice secure behaviors, and they're more likely to make conscious decisions. So, yes, they might share their Netflix password. Netflix are very aware of that at the moment and have been really clamping down. But they might share certain passwords, but they'll be more aware of their choice to do that and their risk appetite.
Are they generally more inclined to use password managers because they're more comfortable with the technology,
Yeah,
whereas maybe someone else, not that they don't want to be cybersecurity conscious, but oh my gosh, it's just so much technology that I'm not familiar with,
yeah.
and I'm just happy that I can remember one password, let alone 40 of them.
Exactly. And they've been taken along sort of every step of the way. So rather than for us in the older generations who didn't grow up with the internet in the same way, we've potentially been a little bit left behind, and particularly generations older. So if we think of our senior citizens, they're more likely to find a bit of a friction when using, for example, a password manager. And of
Mhm.
course, I'm generalizing. Lots of people who are not that, who don't struggle with it. But this is where I can get frustrated when people who are maybe very technical will look down on things like a password notebook, and they will assume that their threat model is the same as a threat model of somebody who's, say, in their 70s.
Yeah.
They're using their password notebook at home, they're very careful with it, and actually it enables them to have more secure passwords rather than trying to demand that they use the same tools that might be appropriate for someone in the workplace.
Yeah, I mean, while a physical password notebook is not great if you're being intentionally targeted and someone's walking into your house, uh, someone online is not going to be able to get your password manager.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I always say, the likelihood of someone breaking into your house and stealing your passwords and you not knowing about it is far lower than the likelihood of someone being able to break into your accounts if you're using the same weak password over and over.
Yeah. So, are most of the people that you work with corporate clients or
Yeah.
end users?
Yeah, mostly corporate clients, and then through that relationship, so it will often be a CISO or security leader who brings us in, and then we will often get face to face with the people in that organization, and that might be delivering awareness sessions, it might be creating content, or it might be running focus groups as part of a culture assessment. So lots of conversations about cybersecurity, which I really appreciate, and is a real privilege for me.
So what kind of things can you do to shift a culture at a company who maybe people are a little bit frivolous with their password management or their cybersecurity stance? How do you make that help a company make that shift for the employees? It's one thing the boss comes out and says, "Okay, everybody, change your password right now or you're fired," but that doesn't really change people's behavior long term. That's only going to impact the moment.
There's so much I could say about this, Chris. So I'll try to hold myself back, but be prepared to shut me down. I will just say a few key things. Firstly, it's about understanding the culture that the organization has. So this is both in terms of the organizational culture, but also the existing security culture. I will often hear people say, and I've said it myself, we need to build a security culture. You already have a security culture. It's what kind of culture you have. It's
Mhm.
whether it's positive or negative or ambivalent. So it's about understanding what are the wider values in the organization and how can security tap into those, and how aligned is the current security culture already? Where do we want to get it to? So it's then really about, I mentioned the word values, and values are fundamental in a security culture. Do people understand the importance of cybersecurity and how it relates to them? That can be really beneficial, tapping into that both in terms of their day-to-day work, but also their personal life, enabling them to be more secure at home or have better security for their family. And then it's also about thinking about the perceptions. Do people see themselves as being capable of engaging with cybersecurity? And I've seen this time and again, and the research also backs this up, that self-efficacy, feeling that I can, is the most important factor in actually shifting behaviors. It's not scaring people, it's not drumming on about the threat, it's actually empowering them. And like I say, so much more I could say about this, but I'll leave that there for now.
Do you find, so I come from an IT background and have always kind of watched the conflict between, let's say, the marketing department and the compliance department. Oh, you can't say that. The compliance is the department of no.
Yes.
And I often kind of hear that same analogy drawn towards if a company actually does have a cybersecurity team or a security team, it's, well, they're the department of no. They're just there to get in our way and make our life more difficult and make our job more challenging. And so, as employees, we're always trying to find our ways around the
Mm-hmm.
security department as opposed to working with them. How do you help a company kind of change that adversarial relationship?
Yeah, it's a really good point. And it's something we find, particularly when we usually run the first culture assessment with an organization. Not always, but often there will be some perceptions around security being a blocker, the security team saying no, and often saying no without explaining the why, which can be really frustrating for people. Um, so it's partly about finding out where those blockers are and where the workarounds are. So when we hold focus groups, a key thing for me and for the team is making sure that we open up a rapport and a dialogue where people don't feel that they're being judged and where people feel it is kind of a trustworthy space so that they will tell us some of these issues that they have. And it's very common for us to end a focus group and people to say, like, oh, that was a bit like therapy. People have these frustrations, and finding out about them is a gift because then we can start to open up that dialogue between the security team and between everybody else in the organization, or where there might be these pockets of resistance. And often it is about stronger communications. So having more of a consultative approach. If you're bringing in controls or you're changing access or access is locked down, having that conversation with people to either look at whether your controls are appropriate, if they maybe could be tweaked, or if not, why that control is there, and helping people understand it's not necessarily because you don't trust them, but it's for wider security issues.
Yeah.
And then I'm a big believer on shining a light on the work of the security team. So we hear this very regularly. People will say things, had it in a recent assessment, I know the security team does good work, but I haven't got a clue what it is. So being able to actually highlight that to people, people have an appetite to know, so why not share it with them?
Is that a little? It kind of comes back to the compliance department. That if the compliance department's job is to prevent lawsuits and no lawsuits happen,
Mhm.
it's kind of that little challenge of like, hey, we did a good job, and we know we did a good job because nothing happened. Is it some of the challenge of measuring the success or the efficacy
Yes.
of a cybersecurity team is that nothing happened as a result of them doing a good job?
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? And it is a big challenge to be able to almost prove a negative. But I think sometimes because of that, we can overlook what is interesting about our work to people or what does demonstrate success. And just being able to tell people, where appropriate, about near misses, about things that could have gone wrong but didn't, being able to tell the stories. And we have lots of amazing stories in cybersecurity. And in one way, the media is a challenge to us, I think, when we communicate cybersecurity messages, because there's a lot of scaremongering out there. There's a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. But at the same time, the media is a gift because it's rare that a day goes by without cybersecurity being in the news. It's a theme, even if it's just a subplot or an element of a lot of TV shows and movies. So we have stories there to bring this to life, and we should use them.
Yeah. Do you find more that kind of people's view of cybersecurity in terms of like, hey, the attacker's this guy in a hoodie doing malicious stuff, and he's intentionally targeting our company versus an opportunistic uh, person?
Yeah, and that's a big myth. I think that we really need to consider our language, because we often talk about cyber attacks being targeted, and how that's usually interpreted by people is literally that there is, as you say, somebody usually in a hoodie purposely targeting us. And as we know, that's not how most attacks happen. So that unfortunately leads to this perception where people think, well, it would never happen to me. Why would we be targeted? And helping people understand, A, you do have valuable information
Yeah.
or assets, but B, it's usually not like that. It's usually, as you say, more opportunistic, more of a wide net. That's one of the perceptions we're battling against. And combined with the optimism bias, it's really tough to unpick that.
The optimism bias you mean by like, oh, no one would attack us because, yeah, we just provide pool cleaning services. No one would want to attack us.
Yeah, and it's this human tendency. This is where I think we can learn a lot, from those social and human sciences I was talking about. So great research in neuroscience shows us that about 80% of people all around the world are skewed towards optimism in their personal lives. So we think the world is getting worse, but we think the bad thing will never happen to us. So we think we'll never get ill, we'll never get divorced, and we'll never get hacked.
So is part of the training helping companies deal with, okay, you've been hacked, now what? Because it seems like that's one of those good things, is to plan for in advance. If something bad happens, how are we going to deal with it? As opposed to, okay, we've been locked out of our systems. What do we do now? Who do we call?
Yeah, it's often our work is, focused on prevention. So whether that's, the work we do pen testing, or the work we do with culture assessments and awareness raising, we're usually helping organizations that want to prevent an attack. But as we know, usually that approach comes from experiencing an
Yeah.
incident, unfortunately. So often organizations will come to us when they say this thing happened, or on a good day it's this thing nearly happened, or this thing happened to a partner, client, supplier, or friendly competitor, and we want to make sure it doesn't happen
Yeah.
here.
Do you have any? This may be outside of your scope, and if it is, say I don't know. I'm
Sure.
fine with that. I always kind of jokingly laugh whenever I get a notification of a data breach. Oh, we value your security, and it's the most important thing to us, and blah 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 blah. It's like, well, no, if it was the most important thing, this probably wouldn't have happened. It kind of seems a little like, is
Yeah.
there a better way to notify people of a data breach incident or something like that, other than saying we clearly didn't value something enough, but we're going to pretend that we did?
Yeah, it's interesting because that drives us mad in cybersecurity, doesn't it? Where we feel like it's a platitude, and we feel like an organization rolls out that line, we take your security seriously. We all roll our eyes.
Yeah.
Now, one thing I haven't done or seen actually, but now I'm going to go and have a look into it, is any research seeing how do people outside of cybersecurity feel about those communications.
Yeah.
There must be some research out there. I just haven't seen it yet. I'd be fascinated to see that, and to see if they feel it's as empty as we do. Um, from my point of view, the best way to handle a data breach and the communications is, A, to have a plan first. You indicated that before, but also to really focus on the right level of transparency. So being able to tell people what you know, when you know it, in the most appropriate way, And coming from the right level. I know it's a long time ago, but we'll never forget the lessons we learned from Talk Talk, where the CEO was on the news every day, and actually there was too much information. And at the same time, there was a data breach, one of the supermarkets in the UK. It was actually a worse data breach, but it got no news time because, and no reputational
Yeah.
damage because of that, because it was all dominated by over communications. So for sure, it's a fine line to tread, and I'm not an expert in incident communications, but I think when it goes well, it can actually build more trust.
As a good example, that one of my vendors last year, I got an email from them saying, "Hey, we just want to let you know that there was this, widely this particular platform that you've heard about in the news. We use this platform, and we're concerned about their cybersecurity incident. We don't believe that it has impacted us, but here's what we're going to do. We're going
Yeah.
to change every password that we use on every system, and this will take us some time, but we're going to follow up with you and let you know it's probably take us a couple of weeks. It's a very manual process, but we'll let you know when it's done." It was like,
Yeah.
oh, like, it made me trust them so much more. It's like,
Yeah.
you admitted that, yeah, there's a security issue. You admitted that you don't know whether it impacted you, but you're going to take precautions. You detailed what the precautions were and a timeline. I was like, oh, okay. There were like no open loops for me to wonder, like, well, what are you not telling me?
Yes, nice. That's a great example. And I think people appreciate that. And it also, what you just described, kind of hints at some of the complexity we're dealing with. It wasn't a data breach, as
Yeah.
you've described, that impacted them directly, but it was a supplier, it was somebody in their supply chain. They were taking these precautions. So I think it kind of gives that glimpse into this isn't necessarily like really straightforward. It's more complicated than we'd like it to be sometimes.
Yeah, and that's always one of my fears is supply
Mm.
chain stuff.
Yes,
I feel like I think I could do a reasonably good job in my sphere of influence, but I don't know what other people are doing.
exactly. And we're becoming more and more connected, and that's only going to increase. I think that's the challenge that we're facing is supply chain is an issue now. What's it going to be like in 5 years
Yeah,
unless we get a handle on this?
things are going to be way more integrated and
Mhm.
at more layers, and it's. I mean, like I had an incident where I did have a supply chain issue, and someone down the line got compromised, and a library that was getting included in something I was doing was running a cryptocurrency miner.
Got you.
It's one of those things. It's like, okay, I see that there's a problem.
Mm.
Now, how do I figure out where it's coming from?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
it was turn this off. Oh no, didn't go away. Turn that off. Turn it back on. Turn this off. Turn that on. Turn this off. And finally, it's like, okay, it's them, but it's probably not them. It's probably supply chain to them also.
Yes. Very good point. It's those layers of complexity that are really challenging. But at the same time, we can recognize the challenges we're dealing with. We can recognize they are going to evolve. But I am still optimistic that we are making progress. And in cybersecurity, we're such a young industry, and I think we often overlook that. And we're so focused, of course, we have to be on the thing that's going wrong or may go wrong or has gone wrong in the past, that we can overlook the 100 times that everything worked. It
Yeah.
goes back to your earlier point, Chris. And we can also fail to take stock of the progress and everything that we have achieved so far. And I think it's important for us as a profession, but also as individuals, to be able to recognize things do go wrong. Not everything is in our control. It's important for us to be as prepared as we can, to have the controls that we can, to mitigate the risk where we can, but also to not always feel like the sky is going to
Yeah.
fall in.
Do you think there are things that we could do at the kind of the educational level as part of regular schooling that
Mm.
will help not necessarily prepare people for, hey, this is your uh, social engineering 101 defense class.
Yeah.
because by the time you write a curriculum, all the vectors will have changed.
Yeah.
But kind of teaching a critical, I don't know, a critical thinking course
Yes.
in the younger at a younger age, where it really helps people to think about what's happening and how it's happening. That way, as the attack vectors change, it's not so much, well, here's how you stop someone from picketing, uh, stealing the wallet out of your pocket by putting it somewhere else. It's
Yeah.
you're just more aware of what's going on around you and can adapt to those things.
Yeah, I think that kind of critical thinking, I do think there's probably more that can be done at the education level, but I think we all need it. And maybe
Yeah.
actually those of us who are out of school need it more, because I think there is a lot around education that, even if it's not directly a critical thinking course or class, if we think about history, if we think about sociology, if we think about English literature, there's a lot of critical thinking that is taught in those disciplines. I think it probably can be drawn out more and applied to technology. But I think for those of us who are maybe further away from our education days, um, having some of that could be really beneficial. And this, I think, applies to, of course, social engineering, to scams, but also to disinformation, because we're seeing those same tactics being used and being, they're as old as time, have always been used in political and social manipulation, but now it's accelerated with the
Yeah.
internet. And so helping people to understand that and understand, as you say, not at the tactical level, but more at the strategic level. And that's why I talk about that unexpected makes you feel something, asks you to do something, because the tactics might change, but that's the kind of strategy that generally underpins any kind of manipulation.
It's almost more understand how people are being manipulated or how
Mm.
you're being manipulated versus, well, if they use Venmo, then you run for your life. Or if they say
Yes,
pay me with a gift card, run for your life. Well,
exactly.
in 6 months, gift cards aren't going to exist anymore. I don't know, but
Yeah.
and it'll be, pay with this new app that's really hot and fancy.
Yeah, exactly. We know that the criminals, evolve their tactics depending on how successful we are. And just as we manage to shore up our defenses in one area, and absolutely, as you say, as new tech comes along, they'll follow those numbers and look at how to manipulate from that angle. So taking that strategic approach and really helping people understand how they think, how they process information, what can influence their actions and their reactions. That's a great way, I think, of building up resilience in people.
Is it almost that, the tech follows cybercrime in terms of we found a hole, let's patch it, we found out a technique, and it's not proactive. We have to teach humans kind of the proactive side, and the tech can handle the reactive side.
I think that's a good way of looking at it, actually. I'd not thought about it like that before, but I think, yeah, if we lead with the human side, so often the human side's kind of been an afterthought, but actually, if we could center our security more on people, then everything I think would follow that.
And kind of centering on the people, does it help when kind of your employees at an organization are seeing as, well, I so much of us have a job where we believe in the mission for the company. The company has a
Mhm.
mission. We're going to help people do this. If you tie in by being good at the way we handle security, it helps us achieve our mission, as opposed to there's just a hindrance that's going to be the stumbling block of it.
Exactly. It comes back to the values point. And if you have strong organizational values, and if you can also tap into people's individual values, then that will really help to kind of tap into their intrinsic motivation for engaging in cybersecurity. So, some of the most healthy cybersecurity cultures that we work with are organizations where they have a very customer focused value and mission. And then cybersecurity obviously can really prove how it supports those values and that
Yeah.
mission. And people then will see the customer data that they're handling and think, what if this was my data? And if I'm caring for our customers, then how do I handle that data with care?
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. So as we start to wrap up, I know we talked before we started recording that your company has some resources concerning cybersecurity culture. Where can they find that, and what are those resources?
Yeah, so you can head to our website, cygenta.co.uk, and look at the resources. We have a security culture guide, and this really has been in my head for, I don't know, 5 years maybe, and finally got it on paper. That's really the ultimate guide to cybersecurity culture. Because a lot of people I find wonder, what is cybersecurity culture? What do we actually mean when we use those words? How can we develop a more positive and proactive cybersecurity culture? How can we track it? And, what makes a good culture? What's going to work for your organization? So we've tried to bring all of this together and showcase some of the great academic research that is out there that will help you in a practical sense apply that to your day-to-day work on your security program.
I like that, trying to help people change the culture as opposed to the hardware.
Yeah. Neither is easy.
Yes, and I know you've authored a number of books. What is your most recent book?
So, Confident Cybersecurity was published, the first edition, in 2020. And I was just hoping like maybe one person would read it and find it beneficial, and then was delighted to get a great response. It went on to become an Amazon #1 bestseller. A lot of people tell me it helps them in their career, it helps them communicate cybersecurity, it helps them share with recruiters what they're looking for, what this field actually means. And the second edition is coming out in September.
And so, what are the major changes from the previous version to your 2023 version?
The book has a lot of case studies. So, vast majority of the case studies have been updated, bringing it up to date with more of a look at AI, more of a look at geopolitics, and what we can learn about cyber war. For example, the Russia invasion of Ukraine. I talk more about deep fakes, and I also was keen in this edition to not just focus on cybersecurity, which of course was a lot of the first edition, but to bring in confidence. What do we mean by confidence? How can we deal with things like imposter syndrome or imposter phenomenon? And how do we handle confidence, whether it's underconfidence or overconfidence, when we're trying to engage people more effectively in cybersecurity?
I can definitely relate to some of those.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you have a YouTube channel as well where you talk about the human side of cybersecurity. Where can people find the YouTube channel?
Yep, you can find my channel at Dr. Jessica Barker, and I share weekly videos that are centered on the human. Essentially, anyone who wants to communicate more effectively about cybersecurity, or who wants really accessible explainers, either for themselves or to use with the people that they care about, head to my channel.
Awesome. We will make sure to link to all those in the show notes because it's really hard to remember all these things when you're driving.
Yes.
And I think most podcasts are listened to while they're driving. So we'll make sure to add all those to the show notes for everybody. Jessica, thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Such a pleasure. Thank you.